Hello, Alexandra. How are you?
I'm doing so well. It's nice to see you.
It's nice to see you. I'm so pumped to have you here. I'm a huge fan. I've been following you for quite a long time before I even launched this podcast. And so when I launched this podcast, you were on my dream list of people to interview.
I'm so honored by that. Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here too.
Absolutely. So I've learned so much from you, and I can't wait to talk about so many things today. But I'd love to start with you just telling us a little bit about what you're doing with your practice and why you do what you do with your practice.
Yeah. I'm a functional medicine doctor. So, what that means for people who are unfamiliar with it, we're looking at the root cause of different health conditions, and we're looking to support the foundations of the body so that the body can do what it was really designed to do, which is keep itself healthy. We have these inborn mechanisms that are supposed to deal with minor health shifts and prevent them from deteriorating into a crisis. If you think about an infection, most people, if they get the flu, they recover from the flu because our immune system was designed to handle that. But sometimes there's breakdown in those systems, things go awry. And in functional medicine, what we're looking to do is identify what are the systems of the body that are defunct, for lack of a better term, and help bring those back into balance so that a person is more resilient, able to handle the things that life throws at them. Then we also have tools in our arsenal for dealing with activated health crises, because not all things can be recovered just by removing the trigger. For example, autoimmune disease, sometimes it's a switch that gets flipped and can't unswitch it. You're just managing it from there. So what I like to do is I like to equip my patients to know how their bodies work, to know what led to disease in the first place, to understand how their lifestyle influences development of illness and influences prevention of illness, and then using as conservative as possible of means for keeping someone healthy. So it doesn't mean I'm against drugs or surgery or some of this traditional mainstream medical approaches. There's certainly a time and a place for those things. I'm grateful for them. I've used them myself, but we want to make sure that we're reserving them for the times that they're necessary so we don't get onto a medication that doesn't have an off ramp, so to speak.
Yes. Okay. I love this. And I just thought of two things I want to talk about just based on what you were saying. But I'd like to go back because the thing that actually attracted me to you initially was that you used to work in the food industry. Is that correct?
I did, yes. So I
Yes.
graduated.
Your hooks are about that, where it's like, I used to do this, and here's what you need to know, right?
Yes, absolutely. We were just touching on this before we started our recording here. I used to work in food science. I graduated with a degree in food science from Purdue. And don't get me wrong, it was a wonderful experience. I really liked what I was doing. I was happy with my studies and my career choice. And it wasn't until I got out and I was working in the field that something started to really click for me. Now, many people find this sort of surprising. I've always been health conscious, and I went into food science and I started doing some things in the food industry and didn't realize what I was doing. How did I end up there? What changed? What led me there? So in my early days, even as a teenager, like in high school, I was interested in health. And one of the reasons I went into food science was because I thought, hey, we've got a chronic disease problem, food matters, and I'm going to go make healthier versions of these products. And even something like natural flavors, I was like, yeah, instead of using artificial flavors, we're going to use natural flavors. And I loved the science of it. It was like science you can eat. Who doesn't want to do that? And then when I got into the food industry, I realized that's not quite what it was. You can have all the ideas you want about making something healthy, making a healthy food product, growing things organically, feeding the world. And then when you get into industry, R&D is all about the bottom line. It's like, how do we take the cheapest ingredients, market it in the most effective way so that people buy it and then we make money? And that's how business is run. So I get it, but as a consumer and now as a mom, you're really heightened in your awareness of how do these things have implications for my health when I consume them, right? I'm maybe dependent on this company for my food or this system for my food. So how can we make this healthy? Well, the business owners are not interested in that because a lot of times the cost of making something healthy is tremendous, especially when you take away some of the different government subsidies or laws that are in place to make certain practices as widespread and mainstream as they are. So
Mhm.
to harken back to what switched for me, in school, I even started to realize that like money was part of this. In our senior design project, the whole idea was to make it as realistic as possible. And so we had to come up with a food product, come up with a marketing plan, sourcing the ingredients, everything. And we all turned it in 2 weeks before the end of the semester. Plot twist, our professor handed it right back to all of us, these like 35-page reports, and said,
Mm.
go cut the cost by 30%. He said, because that's what's going to happen
Ooh.
in industry. And so we had to all go back and do that. It was like this. I mean, we sort of knew it was coming, to be honest, because, your upperclassmen tell you, but that's exactly the simulation was, is it's always, here's my presentation. Okay. In the real world, they're going to have you make it cheaper. And how do you do that? You use different ingredients. You use ingredients that are not grown safely with safe farming methods. You make substitutions instead of strawberry powder, or in my case, in my senior design project, we were using baobab powder, which is sourced from Africa. You might not know what it is, but it's a great source of vitamin C. So we had to substitute that with flavoring, in order to meet the cost requirement. And that's how it happens in the real world in the United States and across the world, when we're talking about how food products are made. And that's why everything is corn and natural flavoring and food dye, because I can market you something brightly colored that smells yummy. And now your kids want you to eat it because it's in a nice, pretty package, but it doesn't have anything nutritionally valuable. So I was working in the flavor industry when I graduated, and that was fun. You can make flavoring out of nothing or what it seems like. And throughout my college career, I was dealing with some health issues for a variety of reasons, but it all kind of came to a head towards the end of my senior year. And when I started working, I had a lot of acne. I had some menstrual concerns. My thyroid was all off. And I was finding these things out while at the same time getting deeper into this industry, which in my
Mm.
case, my desk job, my day job. I didn't work at a desk. It was a lab bench. And I would sit there and I would take these little droplets of chemicals and mix them together to send samples to companies that were considering whether to buy our flavors at the company I worked at. So that was my job, is to mix these little samples, like small scale. And then you get to taste it at the end. And one of the things that first started to bring to my attention that maybe the chemicals I was working with were not something I should consume, despite the fact that like the bins had labels on them that said poison and do not eat and like use in a well ventilated area. In school, you're kind of taught the dose determines the poison, and you're not going
Mhm.
to drink straight benzaldehyde, so it doesn't really matter. And some of these things can be found in food anyway, so it's all fine. I had that internalized message. Well, the senior flavorist, who, mind you, this woman was brilliant. She had a 7-year postgraduate training to become a flavorist. She's the type of person that would taste something and say, oh, this needs a little bit more cis-3-hexenol. Like it's a sommelier to a different level, you know? And she would be sitting there taking like 20 iterations of vanilla ice cream flavoring and tasting it and then making these adjustments as she goes along this cereal path. Really cool when you think about her training. But what was interesting is where I would just swallow it and be like, ooh, that was vanilla. And this was also kind of vanilla. She would spit it out. And she had this little, she called it her spittoon. And she had drawn a skull and crossbones on it. Like, don't touch this. And I asked her one day, why are you spitting it out? And she goes, don't you look at the bottle and what it says? Like, how much of this are you going to drink before you let it kill you? And I was like, so taken aback by that, that it hadn't even clicked for me. And I suddenly started to realize, you know, maybe she has a point. And I'm dealing with some of these health issues. And I went into this career knowing that food and the chemicals in our food matter. But I was thinking about pesticides,
Right.
pesticides are over there. This is natural flavors. It says natural on the label. Well, it also says poison on the label. And that's when it started to occur to me, some of these things that we're doing, this is not biologically the same. Even if some of the chemicals are similar and found at small amounts in food, the way that they are inside of cells, the way that our bodies actually absorb them, the way that I'm coming into contact with them, like this is not healthy. And I also was realizing at the same time, like, I don't think that I was made for a laboratory setting. It's this
Yeah.
very introverted work. I like to be talking to people and feeling like I'm having a good impact. And then I started to feel like I was maybe having a bad impact, had this cognitive dissonance. So I switched gears. I went into medicine, which is much better for me personally. It's things I wanted to learn, but also just the style of clinical work and having relationships with people and seeing the fruit of that. And then I started eventually talking about some of these things. How do these food exposures, these toxin exposures have implications for our health? Because I was talking about it with patients. And then I started to harken back on my experience in food science, things that were very obvious to me, especially in my journey, like, food industry is built this way for a certain reason, and milk pasteurization. They even teach us in food science programs, milk pasteurization makes milk more allergenic because it changes the structure of the protein and can increase the size, and larger proteins trigger the immune system more easily than smaller proteins. And they told us that. That was just something I took for granted. And then you get out into the media and everyone's like, what do you mean pasteurization does anything? It's just cooking and it's just blah, blah, blah. And I understand that there is biological risk to having contaminated food. Like, I'm not discounting that. But I'm also
Yeah.
not discounting the fact that milk allergy is one of the number one allergens in babies and children. My own daughter had a milk allergy. And, I'm all gung ho about gut health, but she still has a milk allergy, and these things develop. So it's things that people need to be talking about, becoming aware of food and how it's processed in our country and how that translates to implications for chronic disease. A little bit of a tangent there. I don't know even what
Well,
the
that was
original
so
question
good.
was.
That is what first attracted me to you, is this information that you were putting out, and then you were empowering with the other piece of it that could help somebody move forward, right? So it wasn't just like, here's all this horrible stuff, which we need to know about, but you also paired it with other information. I just really was so great. I was so grateful for that because I'm on my own, healing journey and journey to clean things up in my home. And it's a lot of information. It's overwhelming. There's so much attached to it that isn't just the information, right? And
Mhm.
people's emotions and politics and all sorts of stuff. And so it was really cool to come across your page. And I'm wondering how all those things has helped you be a better doctor. Like all this knowledge, how has that helped you be a better doctor? Because I don't think obviously not all physicians or doctors or practitioners even know about this stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Well, a big part of my practice is talking about nutrition as it is.
Mhm.
And I think helping people to see how it's not just the nutrition label, but also some of the other things that aren't captured on a nutrition label. So, for
Mm.
example, in the nutrition conversation on social media and things, there's a meme floating around, and you might have seen it. It's a banana, and then on the bottom, it has all the chemicals that have been identified in a banana and their percent by weight. And it's like 10%, protein, 40% carbohydrate. I'm making up these numbers, but you get the idea. And then it gets down to like cysteine, 0.0035%, some of these other micro uh, dosed essentially chemicals. But if you look at something like that, if you mixed all those chemicals together, you would not have a banana. There's something biologically different about living food compared to mixing isolated chemicals in a cup, and it's not the same thing, right? And we were made to consume living food. And so having those conversations with people to illustrate, it's not just your macros. It's not even just, are you getting 400 DFE folate equivalents when you're pregnant? All these different things that are talked about in nutrition and highlighted and harken back to our food system is trying to constantly make amends for the things that they broke. And I think that from a health standpoint, our health system is built that way too.
Yes.
The foundation for our health is our a healthy environment. And that includes the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, but also our lifestyle habits, our sleep, and our stress exposures and how we deal with that. And we've broken that in many ways. It's different from how humans were biologically wired to be. Whether you want to use the term evolve or created, it was not in adaptation to these like cubicles with LED lights, no sun
Yeah.
exposure at all hours of the day, eating manufactured food products with chlorinated water and all these other things. That wasn't what was ideal for our bodies. And now we have rapidly changed our environment so quickly that our bodies don't have the chance to keep up. And no wonder that they're crying out for help. Right. So
Yes.
being able to use food even as an analogy for the greater health system. And then in medicine, we're like, your blood pressure went up. So let's just lower your blood pressure, not realizing that, well, we've sort of come to realize it, but many people themselves don't draw the line of like, my blood pressure is not the problem. It's a means to something that could be critical, having a
Yes.
stroke or developing cardiomyopathy. But it didn't just like get high in an ether. Something led to that. Something is not functioning as it should be. My stress is not where it should be because I'm in a cutthroat culture and I don't rest. Or for whatever reason, I'm dealing with these other anxieties, right? Maybe my anxiety is coming from the fact that my blood sugar's all over the place. Because if your blood sugar drops, your anxiety goes crazy. And if you never know that, your whole life, 30 years later, now you've got chronic disease. So it harkens all back to these foundational elements of a person's health. I like to use an analogy of building a house. You have these load bearing walls. And if one of them is not solid, your house is coming down. It doesn't matter how pretty your landscaping is, how pretty the picture window is, what kind of stone edifice you have. If you don't have your foundation in place, you've got problems.
That was a really great explanation. So it's such a big thing, right? It's such a big thing for people to understand, even though it's such a fundamental thing. And so I'm wondering if you already kind of did, but can you share a little bit more about how lifestyle choices can either lead to the development of illness or lead to the prevention of illness?
Absolutely. So let's talk about the concept of stress, for example. And I'll use an example from my own life. Being in college, I was under stress. I was a little bit neurotic. Go figure. You're in college at a big university and there's people around you that are like, you have to achieve. How do you not internalize some of those things? And of course, it's college, so you're not sleeping as much as you should. Personally, my diet wasn't necessarily where it was. I was probably not eating quite enough. I was not exercise or I was exercising too much. And because of that, my body was under this tremendous stress response.
Yes.
And when I went to the doctor because I was dealing with some hormone issues, I stopped having periods, my hair was falling out, but at the same time I was gaining weight. It wasn't like a traditional expectation of what you would think for someone who is 20 years old and theoretically thriving. And the provider that I was seeing was actually working through the lens of functional medicine. And she showed me how on my labs, which she ran more comprehensive labs than a regular primary care doctor would, she had shown me that my brain was not even signaling to my thyroid to make thyroid hormone because stress pumps the brakes on a lot of these pituitary hormones. It's the same reason that marathon runners or people who have eating disorders might stop having their cycle because the brain's like, well, if this is such a stressful time, I'm not going to like procreate. But the body also wants to conserve resources. So the brain says, hey, I'm not going to stimulate the metabolic rate because of the stress. So we're just going to dampen all of this down. And that was happening with my thyroid where I didn't have a thyroid problem. I didn't even really have a brain problem. I had a stress problem and an input versus output problem. There wasn't balance there. And then my thyroid wasn't functioning. And I was having all these other symptoms because of it. I didn't fit the picture perfect lab markers that you need for a hypothyroid diagnosis, but you could clearly see the pattern when you actually tested the other hormones. And that's one of the ways that your lifestyle, not having the right inputs, leads to not having the right outputs in things that we can see. Like, is my hair staying in my head? What is my weight and my body habitus and my mental health? I was feeling depressed and run down and anxious and like, I thought it was because I was a college student and that's what you experience, but it was exacerbated by my blood sugar being on a roller coaster, my thyroid being all out of whack, and all these different things. That's a technical term, by the way. Thyroid out of whack.
I love it that that's a technical term because it's so accurate.
I'm joking. It's not really. But there are so many other ways that plays out in people's lives. And a big area that I see a similar concept with women, for example, I see a lot of patients who are trying to get pregnant or they're dealing with new onset of symptoms postpartum and they've been on the pill or had been on the pill for a really long time, the birth control pill, because let's say they had painful periods or irregular periods when they were 15. And so they got put on the pill because it magically gives you a 28-day cycle. And they come off of it and then they wonder why they can't get pregnant. And a conversation I have to have with them is, something was wrong with your health. when you were 15, and it's still wrong with your health right now and has been for the past 15 years, but you didn't see the evidence of that because a marker in your body, you just suppressed it. Same thing like if you take a drug and you bring down your blood pressure. The blood pressure is lower. I probably won't have a stroke, but all the metabolic and lifestyle changes that are going on, I'm probably going to develop type 2 diabetes and have some of these other issues, you know? So in the realm of fertility and hormones, or even women who maybe they have a child and then they like the usual thing is, okay, when you're getting your Mirena IUD placed, you know, and then you have your Mirena and you don't have periods and that's so nice. And then now you're in perimenopause and you get it removed and you're like, what is happening to me? That all these hormone shifts are happening. Well, perimenopause isn't a disease. It's biological. Your system changes. That's how it was designed. There's a difference between waking up and realizing you haven't had a period for a year and waking up and feeling like a lion every single day of your life because of the hormones, right? There's other things, your adrenal system, your thyroid, other things that are affecting how you metabolize hormones that go into that. So it's all very complex because of how there are these interrelationships of the systems of our bodies. But at the same time, it's pretty simple too. It's like, what are the things that you don't need to go to medical school to know that you need to do? You need to eat well, you need to exercise, you need to rest, but we're not doing those things.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that one of the things that really contributes to people bypassing that process and I've been really guilty of it in different periods of my life is I don't have time. I don't have time. I'm like a high achiever and I'm divorced and I share custody with my daughter and I'm remarried and I run a business. And so it's like, I don't have time. How can I shortcut, but still, it be semi healthy or this or that? And it's like, it really comes down to this not giving in to the pressure of culture and achievement and capitalism and all these things. You know what I mean? Because when I'm moving slower, when I'm moving at a different pace, my health is different, my sleep is different, my body starts to respond well. You know what I mean? And then it's like it all goes out the window when, stress comes in or a deadline comes in or whatever and it's really it can be really challenging on top of some people just aren't as resourced as other people obviously. So what are some basic things that most people can do to work towards more prevention of future illnesses and future long-term challenges with their health, like today if they were going to start today, what are some things that they could do?
I am a big believer that everybody needs 9 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
And there isn't a research study that shows this, but there are several countless research studies that show the impact of sleep deprivation. And in my patients, in my practice, someone might say they're sleeping 7 hours, which is 7 to 9 hours, that's your recommendation. And they're having all these stress responses and they're having implications for their metabolism because of how cortisol impacts blood sugar and body weight and all these things. And they think, what do you mean I'm sleeping enough? Well, clearly you're not sleeping enough for your body to be able to recover. And I think in some capacity, it would be nice to say we should all quit our jobs and move to a nice remote island and lay on the beach all day and that fixes our stress problem. But we can't do that. So we need to give ourselves more margin. We need a bigger bucket because the things that fill our stress bucket, some of them have to be there. Like my children. My children are the best thing in my life and the single hardest thing about my life because
Right.
they don't come with a textbook, you know? And then you're sitting here like, please, Lord, help me have the wisdom for each individual child. And then you get a different kid and they're different. Like, I don't know how to parent you now because I had my one practice kid and you don't apply, you know? So not that I would ever want to get rid of them, but you get the idea.
Yeah,
You
it's
can't
a
remove certain
happy
stressors.
stressor, but it's still a stressor, right?
Exactly. So things that we can't get rid of, and we can't get rid of like the need for we have to go to work. And sometimes we don't have a lot of choice in what jobs are available in certain industries and what our training is and childcare options and so many different nuances. So we can't change those things, maybe yet, maybe ever. How do we build resiliency for ourselves, increase our capacity? So sleep, get more sleep because that's how your body's recovering from what you're doing to it. And I understand it's like if I sleep earlier, then I don't get me time. But what I oftentimes tell my patients is you're not going to enjoy any of your day if you haven't slept. So you might as well enjoy the time that you're awake by sacrificing an extra hour, or in some cases, 3 hours to get enough sleep. So that's one thing that I would encourage everybody to do is strive for being in bed 9 hours. And that means like trying to sleep, not I'm scrolling on my phone. The second one is if you can increase the proportion of foods that you eat that don't have a nutrition label. And the reason for that is because those are biological living foods, right? If you buy steak at the grocery store, it doesn't say nutritionally what's in there because it's different, because it's unpredictable. It's just a slice of meat. Who knows how much particular fat is on this chunk? An apple, I don't know. It's just an apple. It came from a plant, but it
Right.
came from the ground, conceptually. Whereas when we take those foods and we process them and we say, now I'm adding nitrates to the steak and I'm adding sodium to this salt to the steak and I'm adding some of these other things, now I run into this issue of preservation and how do I make it safe? You have to decrease the water content. It's not technically water content, it's like the water activity is the phrase. Well, now I'm adding preservatives to inhibit mold growth, and now I'm consuming those preservatives. Whereas if you just ate the food to begin with, problem solved. You don't have to worry about natural flavors. You don't have to worry about preservatives. You don't have to worry about some of these other things. So if you can eat a food in its food form, and you can do whatever you want to it at your house, you can smoke it, you can bake it, you can fry it, you can whatever, it still is a food in its whole form, how it was meant to be eaten. So that's number two. And then the third one, and this is really basic, is filter your water in some capacity. We live in a place that has city water, and whether you have a well water or city water, well, I use the example of city water because most of my patients, most of the people I talk to also have city water. You think about these systems, like there's chlorine added to city water to kill bacteria because we used to have problems with widespread water sourced outbreaks. And we're very fortunate to not live in a time where we get cholera from the water, you know. But at the same time, some bacteria is good for you. And we talk about all these gut issues and how people have gut problems because we're not supporting the healthy balance of bacteria. So when you drink water that has chlorine, which is bleach, then you're bleaching your own insides and you're killing your own bacteria. And we would like to keep that in some capacity, So can you do something with your water to let the chlorine either evaporate by sitting it on your counter or using a really high quality filter to get some of that out so that when you're drinking water, you're not killing your own bacteria, which outnumber your own cells by like several orders of magnitude. Plus, there's other things that are in water that we have put there and that we haven't put there. There can be agricultural runoff like fertilizers and pesticides, and they've found birth control pill residues and all kinds of things. Plus, your water pipes, there's two inspector approved materials, copper and PVC, which is plastic. So you're getting either heavy metals or plastic in your water when you pull it out of the sink, no matter where you got it from, the well or the city, water plant. So those are kind of the three foundational pieces: your food, your rest, your water. There's more to it, but
Yeah, there's absolutely more to it, but I think that this is something that we come back to all the time with many different guests on this podcast is there are things within your power because I think a lot of times people feel like, well, I'm powerless. I don't have, 3,000 extra dollars a month to be having a functional medicine membership or this or that. And it's like, well, but you can start with some very basic things. It was interesting. My husband and I went and picked peaches at our local orchard and they take food stamps now.
that's
And I
great.
was like, that is so freaking cool, right? Because there was a period of time where my mom needed food stamps when she got divorced from my dad. And there was definitely limitations to what you could get. I mean, you could get produce and you could get meat, but there were certain limitations. And now the fact that you can use your EBT card at an orchard where there's fresh fruits and vegetables and, the rawest form of honey and all this. I mean, I just think it's really great. And I think that people just need to be willing to do a little research, just search around a little bit and kind of look up and see that there's actually some fundamental things that you can do before supplements, before even a doctor that will
Mhm.
make a radical difference in your health. So let's talk a little bit about stress and adrenal function, like some of the things that you've been really touching on recently. I know you have launched a new book that is so exciting, and so I'd love to talk a little bit about that, like adrenal health and our hormonal systems and our menstrual cycle and all of these things.
Totally. So, to harken back to what I mentioned a little bit earlier about stress and the thyroid, there's
Mhm.
this big long word called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal thyroid gonadal axis. And really,
Mhm.
what that's talking about is how different parts of your brain are involved in sending out hormones that communicate with your thyroid. For women, ovaries, men, the testes, and then the adrenal glands. And it's this reciprocal loop where the ovaries, I'll say for women, I'm a female, you know. So that's what I know. That's very specialized. The thyroid and the adrenal glands give these signals back to the brain. And then the brain is constantly taking inventory of like what's happening here, what's happening here. The brain is the manager, you know. It's like the mom of the household, you know what everybody's doing and what's for dinner and whether or not the laundry has been done in the past week. So that's what your brain is doing behind the scenes. You're not conscious of it. And it's also surveying all the other things that are going on, the metabolic environment, expenditures, what you've been doing, how much rest has been occurring. And it makes decisions based on all of those things. And cortisol, we talk a lot about cortisol as being a problem. And it is a problem when there's too much of it, but it's also a good thing. It's a normal thing that we're supposed to have that's supposed to be high in the morning. And we run into problems when, because of stress, and stress can come in the form of psychological stress, you know, work is hard, relationship issues. It can also come in the form of physical expenditure, exercise too much, lack of sleep, you know, uh, not enough nutrition, not enough of the right kinds of nutrition. All those are interpreted as stressors on the body. And when that bucket overflows, when there's too much of this signaling going to the brain of like, I am outputting more than I have the input for, I'm going to start trying to protect myself from the harmful effects of that stress. Because stress is the new smoking. Stress will kill you. Cortisol, as we talk about it, it can be damaging when there's too much of it. And so the body will shut down other systems in response to that stress, including its own adrenal function. It's going to end up increasing the rate that it metabolizes and clears away cortisol and some of these other neurotransmitters and neurohormones that get released in order to keep the levels from rising up too much. Stress is a big driver of a lot of these patterns because the implications of amping up your system, you know, when you think about adrenal overdrive or being in this like fight or flight state, you have to increase your blood sugar, your blood pressure, all these things to be able to run away from a tiger. Well, increased blood pressure and blood sugar chronically over time, now you have hardened arteries and you have insulin resistance and things. And then we take it another level. Now my insulin is causing problems with my hormone levels, and now I maybe am showing signs of PCOS. Or maybe because of the stress, it's so high that I stop signaling to my ovaries to make hormones at all. And now I don't have periods and I would like to get pregnant. And now I'm in an IVF clinic because that's what they said is the next thing to do. Or maybe
Yeah.
now my thyroid is not functioning, my thyroid hormones are low. I never get a diagnosis because normally to have hypothyroidism coming from your thyroid, your brain would be like yelling at your thyroid to make it work harder. Well, for stress, my brain is not yelling at my thyroid. My brain's not even talking to my thyroid. It's like, we're done with the thyroid. We don't want to be increasing our metabolism. So your health is falling into disarray and there's no diagnosis for it because you don't follow a traditional pattern of some of the issues that we're medicating, right? If you don't meet certain criteria, there's no medication for you. And now you're just feeling unwell until it goes on long enough and oh, now you do meet the criteria. So here's this pill, you know?
Yes. Mhm. Mhm.
So that big connection in that circle with hormones is really all of those things, your thyroid, your ovarian hormones, your brain hormones. And then we talk about inflammation, and inflammation is a mediating factor for hormonally related problems. I have period pain, let's say. Well, that's caused by inflammation. The inflammation is what mediates the pain. What are all the things that are contributing to my total inflammatory load so that when I then have a period and I normally make some inflammatory chemicals to shed the uterine lining, it's like I'm at a 150% instead of like 25%. And now I'm in a lot of pain. Or the inflammation's affecting my immune system. And now I'm attacking my thyroid and I have inflammation that's snowballing from that. in the book that I wrote, so thank you for bringing it up. It's called Go With Your Flow, helping people to understand the implications of some of their hormones. I go through item by item, what are these symptoms that people have that are related to their cycles? And it's not just like bleeding, it's also the hormonal shifts that cause breast tenderness or weight changes or things like that, or with certain diagnoses like fibroids or endometriosis, which is pretty common and increasingly common. What are some pharmacological treatments available? What are potential problems with those or benefits of those? But then also, what are your alternatives? And the reason I'm addressing all of those issues is because a big problem that I see in the medical system is for women, no matter what your problem is, you get the birth control pill. And if you're perimenopausal, you basically get the rebranded version of the birth control pill. But it's the same drug. It's levonorgestrel, which is the same thing. It's just got a different name. And women never get the luxury, if I were to dare call it that, of knowing how their bodies work in the first place. A lot of times, my patients, they ask me, like, why did nobody tell me that this wasn't doing for me what I thought it was doing for me, or that it was potentially causing these side effects? I don't really know. I think in our medical system, we don't have other options. So well meaning physicians are doing their best to give them what they can. But the book is designed to help people see if you don't want birth control as a treatment, here's what else you could do. And if you don't want birth control as a contraceptive, here's the research regarding the efficacy for all the other methods of contraception. And also just a philosophical discussion of like, what does your body need? How can you eat for hormonal health? How can you sleep for hormonal health? Um,
Yeah.
and different things like that. My hope is that it will empower people to understand their bodies in ways that no one ever taught them. Because
Yeah.
sex ed is, let's be honest, it's like, here's a pad and a condom and don't get pregnant.
Yeah. That's really incredible. What prompted you to specifically write a book about that? Like that because you have so much knowledge. Why that particular topic?
Yeah, it really came down to my patient population and being a female. I have a
Yeah.
particular interest in the things that apply to me. I'm of childbearing age, I have little kids, and fertility is interesting how it all works together. But so many of my patients are women, and so many of them come in with these problems. And then they ask that exact question of, why has nobody told me this before? And I got
Yes.
to thinking, like, why has nobody told you this before? So I
Yeah.
think I'm going to tell you. So I thought maybe if I put all the things I have to say into 350 pages, somebody might read it
No,
and
I
be
think
helped by
that's
it.
amazing. I'm gonna get your book. I find myself having, asking that question a lot, especially as I interview different types of, specialists. And it's like, why didn't anybody tell us this? And one thing a good friend of mine did remind me when I was mad one day about something, she said, "You do have to understand, um, that some of this stuff that's coming to light, we didn't know then, right? So some of it is that this information is more easily accessible because of social media and the internet and YouTube and Google." She said, "But also because we were advancing science, so for example, I took a gene mutation test and learned all about my methylation mutations, and I'm like, this makes so much sense about so many things, you know?" And I'm like, "Why didn't," and she's like, "But that's newer. That's a newer thing that they didn't know about." And so there's this balance of understanding that some of this is we are learning about certain things now because of advancement, and then the other half of it is that women, they don't do testing on women. Like everything's based on results from men. Uh, and they're treating us based on, and the medicine hasn't caught up. The mental health field hasn't caught up from the research that isn't designed for our female biology at all.
Mhm.
And so it's like to me, the way I've experienced is there's a lot of that and there's a little bit of this, and it's I think your book is really important because it's going to help women navigate some of these things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I may, one of the things I wanted to circle back to a little bit, as you mentioned about MTHFR or methylation or some of the genetic defects, you say we didn't know about some of these things. And that's true. But one of the things that I also want people to understand, kind of coming back to the conversation we had at the beginning, is this wouldn't have been relevant. We maybe didn't even need to know about the gene if we didn't break certain things to begin with. So, MTHFR is a genetic defect where a person lacks the enzyme required to metabolize folic acid and produce methylfolate inside their own body. So, folic acid is a synthetic form of folate. Folate is found in food. We need that in order to survive for lots of reasons, particularly in order to reproduce, because folate is involved in neural tube formation of a fetus. And one of the things that was found in the greater medical community was women who bore babies that had neural tube defects like spina bifida were deficient in folate because they were not consuming enough of this healthy food because it wasn't accessible to them for whatever reason. This used to be a very standard part of our diet when we ate cows, how we were supposed to. Anyway, so in response to that, in response to all the sociocultural factors that led to nutrient deficiencies in a population, the government was like, let's dump folic acid into the things that people are eating. So they're eating manufactured grain products, which are void of folate. So we will synthesize lab-made folic acid and put it into the food supply, which is great. It is helping fix the spina bifida problem for people who are consuming those foods. But it wasn't a problem until we weren't eating the folate from food that it was naturally found in, for all the reasons that the Industrial Revolution brought us away from farms and into cities where there's all these kinds of problems. And now we're playing catch up. And now we're saying, well, why do some people have other issues with folic acid, where now folic acid becomes toxic to them because they can't metabolize it into the methyl form the way they're supposed to? Oh, they have this genetic defect, which might not have ever been a problem if we
Right.
stayed in our closer knit, agriculturally based communities. So it's just something to be thinking about. Like, I think it's great that we know about these genetic variants, but something like breast cancer, like the BRCA1 and 2 mutations and how they lead to breast cancer, it's not just like you have the gene mutation and now you get breast cancer. You could have the
Right.
gene mutation and never develop any kind of cancer, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, uterine cancer. Something else is mediating that. And that's what we haven't figured out formally. And we understand that there's toxins and so many other things that are at play. But we need to just consider, broadly speaking, the foundation for our health. You could have a
Yes.
genetic mutation or not. 1 in 8 women still get breast cancer. I was tested for the BRCA mutations because they're in my family, and by the grace of God, I don't have them to my knowledge. I could still get breast cancer for a million other reasons. So that's where it comes down to, is like looking at how are things supposed to be? How is it designed? And what have we been doing that's breaking that? And you don't even really need to have any scientific degree to think logically about the environment. You look at a wild animal and how it functions.
No, I agree. It's interesting because as I've been on this journey learning more about it, I think, well, these have probably always existed, but they weren't expressed. And it was probably because our bodies weren't having to process out these toxins, right? We were outside most of the day. We were getting movement all the time. So that wasn't an issue, like stagnant, all these things. And we were eating whole foods. None of these, like, it's about filtering out stuff out of out of processed foods, a lot of it, right? And so I've been thinking about this a lot, that it's like, because a lot of people in this community think it's like it's like, oh my gosh, right? And at first I did feel that way, but then I'm like, okay, but if I just remove the things that make that a problem in the first place, I would just be living the way I should be living anyway. Like, it's not, you know what I mean? And so I think it's hard because we live in a world where it's, consume what's given to you and then put a supplement or a this or a that to like band-aid or fix it and make it more digestible or processable or whatever. And it's just hard. There's a lot of resistance to just, yeah, like resistance to getting back to the foundation of what nourishes you. You know what
Mhm.
I mean? And that's a journey that my family and I are on right now. Like, we're taking it very seriously, of trying to get back to what is nourishing and just basic foundational health, you know?
Yeah. In so many ways, not just food, what you consume by reading and everything else too.
I've taken a serious social media audit, and I'm spending very little time besides like outputting and, a couple of key things, like I'm not on social media very much anymore consuming. I mean, there's so many things, right? And I think that can be hard. It can be hard when you're just like caught up in the mix of like just every day you're going through the motions. You know what I mean?
For sure.
Okay, I have I think one last question and we'll wrap it up. I am curious because there's a trend that I've noticed is a lot of women who are really kind of coming into midlife, and I'm calling it this like midlife awakening, if you will. I'm midlife. In perimenopause, and I just seem to sense that all these women around this age, like 35 to 45, 40 to 50, 55, a lot of us are waking up and going, what the F? Like, what have I been doing? Lifestyle, pressure that I've been giving into, all these things I've been saying yes to, the way I've been consuming things, right? Like everything. And they're really taking a hard look at what the heck they've been doing the first half of their life. Have you noticed that trend going on?
Absolutely. I think women and families in general, but women in particular who tend to be that central point of their household, it's becoming aware to so many people because of these good conversations like what you're facilitating and elsewhere online about things are not as they should be, and we've taken that for granted without
Yeah.
realizing the implications that it has, not just on our health, like am I going to die because of this, but also our experience of life, our well-being, our quality of life. And my caution in response to that to many people is there is not a miracle solution to some of these things. And I know that for many, they're thinking, oh, hormone replacement therapy, even bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. Is this what it is? Is testosterone microdosing for women the savior?
Yeah.
Maybe for some people. And I do have some patients where that's the most appropriate thing. But I think we need to look at the big picture too of have we been misled by people
Yeah.
telling us we need certain things, we need to do things a certain way, and coming back to this intuitive awareness that we used to have about how we eat and how we function and what's important and what our values are. So I see absolutely what you're pointing out. And I encourage that for everybody, look around you and try to realize like how many of the things you're doing are because someone else told you you need to be doing that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
At the same time, the solution to that is maybe not always buying something else that someone else told you you need, right?
Yes. So even though we're saying the solution might not be buying something else, how can we get a hold of your book though?
Yes, my book, Go With Your Flow, is available wherever books are sold. So
Okay,
Amazon,
very
Barnes and Noble, the publisher is Bloomsbury, so you could check it out on their website. Certainly look to resources. I would encourage that, more so just to lend some context to my comment of there is not a miracle like solution to anything. There's complexity to many of the problems that we have. So,
absolutely.
but
And it
yes,
sounds
my
like your book speaks to that too.
that is my hope behind it is that it gives some context and some nuance. And I really hope that it helps people to get some more depth in this conversation and to see some areas that, where they are struggling with their health to make changes. And there's more to come on that, more books coming in 2026 and 2027. I signed a contract a few days ago. So stay tuned if you like what I
Congratulations.
write. Thank you. Thank you.
And where can people find you online?
Yeah, so I'm active on Instagram. It's at Dr. Alexandra MacKillop. Um, I also have a website where I write articles along the lines of health topics, particularly as they relate to women and women's health. That's alexandramacKillop.com. And then I do have monthly, it's not monthly, it's like mostly weekly actually, Substack newsletter as well. And so there's a link to that on my website and on my Instagram, but it's substack.com or substack.alexandramacKillop.com. Gosh, I should know that. Maybe it's the other way around. Click the link on my my profile. Maybe that would be better.
All the links in the show notes. I just always love to ask so
Awesome.
that, people can, if they want to go look at, your social right away or whatever that we stated in the episode. So I'm really excited. All of that will be linked in the show notes. I appreciate you so much. I could ask you a million more questions, but I've used some restraint. So we We can keep this at a good length. And I'm just really grateful for all the work you're doing and that you are willing to come on and share some of your time and wisdom with us today.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's been a pleasure, and it's such a privilege to collaborate with others like you in the field.
Thank you. I appreciate you. All right, guys, we'll see you in the next episode.